All right, everyone. We are getting there, right? We're knocking out these videos on the Constitution. This one, we're looking at the ratification of the Constitution. So we're still in this topic of the Constitutional Convention. What we want to see is, did the, here we go, sorry. Did the Constitution correct the problems with the Articles of Confederation? And if it did correct the problems, will the people and the states approve it, right? So that's what they're facing. So Constitutional Convention ran from May to September of 1787. Now in September of 1787, the work begins to try to convince everybody, should we approve the Constitution? So let's take a look at the Articles of Confederation and the problems. So we have these here, these weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation. And then let's take a look one by one at how the Constitution addressed those weaknesses. So one issue was that small states had disproportionate representation in the Articles of Confederation, right? So we had one vote for each state. In the Constitution, you end up with two houses of Congress, one based on population, one based on equal representation. So that helps to kind of mediate that problem. Okay, Congress did not have the ability to tax. Constitution has gave Congress the power to tax. Congress was powerless to try to regulate foreign and interstate commerce. In the Constitution, Congress is given the power to regulate trade. In the Articles of Confederation, there was no executive to enforce the rules that Congress passes. So the new Constitution has a president. No national court system under the Articles. The Supreme Court is created in the Constitution. So you can see piece by piece, the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation are being met by the Constitution. Okay, to change the Articles of Confederation, it required a unanimous consent, which made it nearly impossible to amend the Articles and change anything in them. But for the Constitution, it's only 3/4 of the states that are needed. So you don't have to have unanimous consent to amend the Constitution. In the Articles, you had to have a 9/13 majority to pass laws, which was, again, that's a hard hurdle to pass. So Congress can now make laws based on just a majority, and then the president can veto that law if it does not pass muster with the president. So that gives a little bit of a check on Congress. So it's easier to pass laws, but there also is a check on that. Okay, so the idea here with the Articles was a firm league of friendship, which basically was just a treaty, right? They were a treaty of independent states working together. And now under the Constitution, the phrase in the first sentence is a more perfect union. So your English teachers will tell you more perfect isn't possible, but in the Constitution, they said more perfect. All right, so let's take a look. This is these weaknesses are addressed. So now, to get this Constitution ratified, that means they have to get enough states to approve it. So let me give you an idea of what they're facing here. Okay, so to ratify the Constitution, and this is written into the Constitution, you can actually read this. It's still in our Constitution. It was a one-time use kind of article in the Constitution because this only needed to be ratified once. So in order to ratify the Constitution, 9 of the 13 states had to agree, right? These in the Constitutional Convention, the states had to vote on if they would send this out to the state legislatures. So if we look here, you can see all of the states attending, they took a vote. All of the states but New York ended up sending this out to the states to ratify. All right, so we can see how each individual person voted in here. So we can see in New York, Hamilton voted yes, and then the other 2 delegates to the Constitutional Convention from New York voted no. And so it was sent what they did is they took this Constitution and they sent it out to the states, and each state, either in their state legislature or in a special constitutional convention of their own within their state, they had to choose yes or no. Are they going to accept the Constitution? So it gets sent out. Those supporting the Constitution, they're called the Federalists, right? So there were 39 who voted yes. They're called the Federalists. That meant they were in support of a federal government. There's 16 opposing the Constitution. Those are the Anti-Federalists. So the view of the Federalists that are pro-Constitution, their view basically is that a strong national government is needed to maintain stability. They also, let's see here. Okay. They also appeal more to the wealthy or the business owners and the educated. And when I say educated, what I mean here are like those who may have attended university, those who had some kind of degree, right, to be able to practice their profession. Okay, the reason they appeal to the business owners is because a strong national government means order and stability. Business does better, economies do better when things are stable. So their strategy was to emphasize the weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation and then show that their opponents who are against the Constitution really have no solutions. Right? So what they say is the Articles of Confederation were weak and the Anti-Federalists don't have a solution. They just want us to continue with the Articles of Confederation. The advantages are that they were well organized. Right? There were strong leaders. You saw the majority of the delegates of the Constitutional Convention would be called Federalists. So well organized. Their disadvantages is that the Constitution is an unknown. And sometimes people are afraid to take a risk on an unknown, especially when you're talking about your form of government. And then the other issue is that there was a lack of a Bill of Rights. So the people were afraid that the Constitution didn't do enough to protect individual rights from overreach of government. So these are our Federalists. Our main people, right? We have George Washington, who is very trusted in the colonies, well, in the states now. Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, James Madison, the father of the Constitution, and then Alexander Hamilton. What they ended up doing is they wrote a series of essays called the Federalist Papers. The main author of the Federalist Papers was Alexander Hamilton. The original plan was to write about 25 essays, and they were going to split those essays between 3 different people, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay. So as they wrote these essays, they would take bits and pieces of the Constitution and explain the meaning behind it. It ended up with Hamilton writing about 50 of 80 total Federalist Papers. So Alexander Hamilton did the bulk of explaining. James Madison was second. He wrote about 25. I can't remember the exact number, but around 25 of the Federalist Papers were written by James Madison. And then we had John Jay, who wrote 5 of them. But these 3 men were convincing the public that the Constitution is the way to go. And so when we wonder now today, almost 250 years later, what the meaning of the Constitution was in the minds of these framers, the best place for us to look is the Federalist Papers. This is where it is explained to us what they were thinking, what they intended. Okay, oh, here we go. Forgot this was here. 85 essays. So the Anti-Federalists, who were against the Constitution, they're afraid that a stronger central government is going to destroy all of the work and the gains made in the Revolution. Right? They think the stronger federal government is going to be too authoritarian, and so it will therefore limit democracy. And they are afraid that this strong federal government is going to restrict the rights of states to make decisions at a local level. And so they're arguing against the Constitution. Okay, their main argument or strategy is that it does not contain a Bill of Rights. And they say that this gave the central government more power than the British government ever had. That was their main argument. I have trouble. I don't know. Anyway, I have trouble believing that one, just because the British government is, it's coming from a place of monarchy, and so it kind of has a different birth. But I also have the benefit of hindsight. These people did not. The advantages that they had is that they were able to appeal to the popular distrust of government that the former colonists felt, right? So now we have citizens of the United States, but most of them remember being colonists and they remember not trusting their centralized government. So they really used an emotional appeal in trying to oppose the Constitution. Their disadvantage is that they were not as well organized as the Federalists. So there are a series of essays called the Anti-Federalist Papers. There's not as many of them. They're not as in-depth, and they didn't get the traction and they didn't get printed and sent around and circulated as well as the Federalist Papers did. So they were slow to respond. And if we want to see who our anti-Federalists are, we have Patrick Henry, Thomas Jefferson, Samuel Adams. Those are some big names of people who were anti-Federalist. Now, when we talk about Federalists and anti-Federalists, these are not political parties. These are, we're just talking about the viewpoint on one issue of the passage of the Constitution. So, for example, Thomas Jefferson, he is an anti-Federalist when we're talking about will the Constitution be ratified. He will later be a Democratic Republican. But if I go back to the other slide and we look at James Madison, he's a Federalist. He wants this Constitution passed. He also will be a Democratic Republican. So later on in history, he's going to be on the same side as Thomas Jefferson in terms of political ideology. So this is not political parties right now. We're just talking one issue, should the Constitution be ratified or not. So I mentioned this has to go out to the states, right? So the states have to decide, will the Constitution become the law of the land? And the states can do this in a couple of ways. They can either hold a special ratifying convention, or in some states, they use their state legislature as the ratifying convention, right? So they would use their Congress. So we can see right away, let's take a look. Delaware is the first state to ratify the Constitution. If you if you go to Delaware, they still pride themselves in being the first state of the United States because they're the first one to ratify. And you can see December of 1787. So that's pretty quick. About 4 months, they decide, it's unanimous. Pennsylvania, 46-23. New Jersey, Georgia, right? And we're looking at all of these. So Pennsylvania's 1787, New Jersey, 1787, Georgia, January of 1788, Connecticut, January 1788, Massachusetts. We're getting a little closer here. Massachusetts was 187 to 168. So there was not a unanimous vote here for Massachusetts. February of 1788, Maryland passes it 63 to 11. So if we look there, April, so you can see this is starting to take some time. April of 1788. We've got South Carolina in May of 1788. New Hampshire. New Hampshire ratifies, June of 1788. So at this point, after 9 states have approved, this has now become the law of the land, right? This word ratification means that it has been accepted, and the Constitution can now move forward as the government of the United States. However, it was important to these men, these framers, that all 13 states agree to ratify the Constitution. And you really want to think about why. This is important. These states are going to be bound by these decisions. They did not want in the future for some state to say, we didn't choose this, right? And so we have some pretty major states that are not on this list yet. New York, for example, has not ratified this Constitution, and Virginia has not ratified this Constitution. Those are 2 of the largest states by population. So there's still work, even though in June of 1788, this is a done deal. There's still work to be done. So we can see the next one that comes up is Virginia and New York. Okay, but we're still hanging on. We still have North Carolina. Let me find, sorry, there we go. North Carolina is November of 1789. They ratify, and then there is one holdout that waits until they wait basically until like after Washington has been president, and that is Rhode Island. So if you're looking at Rhode Island here, Rhode Island ratified in 1790. George Washington began his presidency in 1789. He was elected in 1788. So Rhode Island is holding on. So Rhode Island is the last one, and it is unanimous. Now, these 4 states, we have to talk about what was promised to these states in order for them to ratify the Constitution. They would not ratify until a promise had been made that a Bill of Rights would be added to the Constitution. So that's the dividing line here. A Bill of Rights, it was promised that the first Congress of the United States would add a Bill of Rights to the Constitution. And at that point, we then have Virginia and New York agree, North Carolina agrees, Rhode Island holds out. They really were forced into accepting the Constitution because they're this tiny state here. And, it was made clear to the state of Rhode Island that to get the protection of all of this, they would need to join in. So Rhode Island kind of came in kicking and screaming at the end after Washington had began his presidency, after the first Congress had began, they'd been elected and had began doing their work. So if we are looking at this Bill of Rights that was promised, right, this is the first 10 amendments to the U.S. Constitution, and an amendment means a change. So these are the first changes or additions to the Constitution. There were something like 27 amendments proposed, only 10 that ended up in there. So and you'll become pretty familiar with these. Some of these come up more often than others in our study of history. But we have freedom of religion, press, speech, and assembly, and petition in the first one. Right to keep and bear arms, no quartering of soldiers, no unreasonable search and seizure. Number 5, protection of the accused. This is due process, right? The courts need to follow processes and rules when they charge somebody and arrest somebody and then put them on trial. Right to a speedy and public trial by jury. Trial by jury in civil suits is number 7. No excessive fines or cruel punishment, number 8. Any powers that are not listed in the Constitution are reserved to the people. Okay, that's number 9. And number 10, powers not listed in the Constitution that are reserved to the states. So the ones that we will see come up, absolutely Amendment number 1. This one comes up all the time. Amendment number 2, we've had a lot of disagreement over time over Amendment number 2. And then this, like in terms of history, those are the 2 we're going to see dealt with the most. And then we come into like 4 and 5 a little bit, mostly in the 1960s when we talk about the Supreme Court of the 1960s. So this is more government. Like you have to memorize these when you take government class your senior year. You just want to be aware of the process of how this got added to the Constitution. So that is, at that point, we have a Constitution. Now, some primary sources that you might see on this. There was a series of cartoons that were printed in the newspapers as each state ratified the Constitution. This became a graphic that was used to keep track and count, right? So we can see this. This is the erection of the 11th pillar of the great national dome, right? So these are supposed to look like columns that would hold up a building or a dome. And so they call it the federal edifice, an edifice being a building. And so with each state, it becomes stronger. Right? And the idea is if they don't all join, the federal edifice could crumble. So this is that push for a unanimous approval or a unanimous ratification of the Constitution. And so depending on which, how many of these pillars are standing when you see this cartoon tells you where in the process the cartoon was printed. The finished one looks something like this. And we get this this kind of feeling or sense as our nation that united we stand and divided we fall, right? So when we all agree we're unanimous, we stand, divided we fall. Now, once the Constitution was ratified and it became part of, or it became the framing document of our government, when new states come into the United States, part of the process of them becoming a state is they have to ratify the U.S. Constitution. So we had in 1790, 13 of 13 states ratify. It was unanimous. And then every state after that fact has ratified the Constitution. So we have unanimous ratification of the Constitution by our states. So like Washington joined the Union. Washington was admitted as a state in 1889. Washington ratified the Constitution at that point. So that is kind of how this Constitution functions and how it became the the framing document of our country. Okay, the next video or the next topic we're going to go into is the Constitution itself. And we're just going to look at the structure of the Constitution. So what are the different articles and parts of the Constitution and how is it structured? And that will finish up our study of the U.S. Constitution. And then from there forward, we will refer back to issues that come up with the Constitution. So you do have to have a beginning understanding of how this all is structured and works. So I will pause here. I want you to find your notes and jot down whatever you can for this topic on ratification, the Constitutional Convention ratification. And then in the next topic, we'll be, like I said, we'll be looking at the Constitution itself. Happy studying, A-Push.